Motivation can feel random. Some days you wake up ready to go, and other days even simple tasks feel way harder than they should. So today we're going to be ranking common motivation habits from things that actually build long-term motivation to things that can completely kill it. This is the motivation tier list. I'm ranking these based on how much they actually help you take action, stay consistent, and build real momentum over time. By the end of this video, you should have a much clearer idea of what actually drives motivation and what just feels like it does. First up, we have consistency. This is probably the single most important driver of motivation. A lot of people think that motivation comes first and then you take action, but in reality, it's the other way around. You take action and that builds motivation, which turns into discipline, and eventually that becomes part of your identity. Every time you show up when you don't feel like it, you reinforce the idea that you are someone who follows through. So this one is going to be at the top of S tier to get us started. Okay, on the complete opposite end, we have doom scrolling. This is one of the fastest ways to destroy your motivation. Endless scrolling floods your brain with easy dopamine, and over time your baseline shifts. So when you go to do something productive, it just feels boring in comparison. It's also just a huge time suck. One thing that really helps is adding friction. You can move your apps off your home screen, set app limits, or just keep your phone in another room while you're working. I personally like using this app called Forest on my phone, as it starts a timer during which I can't access any other apps on my phone. And even something small like that seems to make a pretty big difference, but doom scrolling in and of itself is easily in the F tier. Okay, next up we have sleep. If your sleep is bad, your motivation will also be really bad. Low sleep means lower dopamine, more fatigue, worse focus, and it becomes much harder to care about anything. At that point, it's not even really a mindset issue, it's purely biological. A simple takeaway here is just protecting your sleep window. Try to go to bed and wake up around the same time each day, and avoid things that disrupt sleep like caffeine or excessive screen time late at night. Sleep quality is foundational, so I'm going to be putting it in the S tier as well, right behind consistency. Moving on, now let's take a look at caffeine. Caffeine can definitely boost motivation, especially in the short term. It increases alertness and dopamine signaling, and it can help you get into a focused state. But it's not something that builds motivation in the long term. It's best to think of it more like a tool. Personally, caffeine can make me more easily distractible, so I like to pair it with L-theanine, and I've noticed that helps me to better focus the energy that caffeine provides. So I'm going to be putting caffeine in the B tier. All right, next up, let's do small wins. So motivation really thrives on progress, and even something small like one extra rep or finishing a single task can help build momentum. You feel good, you want to keep going, and that compounds over time. So a practical way to do this is tracking tiny improvements. Add one more rep, 1 minute, or one task, and actually acknowledge that you completed it and that you did a little bit better than you did yesterday. That feeling of progress is what will keep you coming back to whatever habit you're trying to form. So this is a big one, and I'm also going to be putting this one in the S tier, probably right behind sleeping. Okay, next up we have waiting to feel ready, or waiting for motivation to strike. This is a huge trap that a lot of people fall into. If you wait for motivation before you take any action, you're going to end up doing nothing most of the time. Motivation is very inconsistent, so instead it's better to act first and let motivation catch up. A simple technique is to do something like a countdown, counting down from 3, 2, 1, and just starting whatever task that is on your plate for the day. And it sounds pretty basic, but it works well because it cuts off overthinking. Waiting around for motivation to strike is definitely going into C tier. Next, we have your environment. Your environment shapes your behavior more than your willpower does. If your phone is right next to you, you're gonna check it. If your gym clothes are laid out, you're more likely to go. For example, I've been trying to stretch more, so I leave my yoga mat out where I can see it right as I enter my room. And this basically helps by removing friction, and it makes the habit a lot easier to follow through on. The main idea is to make good habits very obvious and bad habits inconvenient. This is a really powerful one, so I'm going to be putting it in the S tier as well, probably ahead of the small wins. Okay, next let's talk about motivational videos. These were a very popular thing on YouTube, and they probably still are. These can give you a short-term boost in dopamine, and if they're used the right way, they can actually help. For example, if you're already in the car and you're on the way driving to the gym, throwing on a motivational video or speech can get you more amped up. But if you're laying in bed and you're watching them to try to get motivated, it usually doesn't work. And to be honest, I think that's what most of people who consume this type of content are doing. So it just becomes another form of passive consumption itself. So this works best as a supplement to action, but not a replacement for it. But I think it can help in certain situations. So I'm going to be putting this one in the B tier also. Next, we have exercise. Exercise is one of the fastest ways you can improve your mood, your energy, and confidence. Even a short walk around your block can shift your entire mental state. When your body feels better, your mind will usually follow. A simple tip here is not overcomplicating it. You don't need a perfect workout every time, just move around. Even 20 to 30 minutes can make a noticeable difference, so I'm going to be putting exercise also in S tier, right behind the environment. Now let's take a look at over planning. Planning itself can obviously be very useful, and it's something that I definitely recommend, but at a certain point it can turn into procrastination. The problem is that while you're planning, you probably feel like you're being productive and you're doing something, but in reality you're not taking any action in the real world. A good way to avoid this is setting a limit. You can plan for 5 to 10 minutes and then you're going to start the first action that's listed. You don't want to let planning replace doing, so over planning is going to be going in C tier above waiting. Next, we have setting clear, small goals. So the basic premise of this is instead of saying something big like I want to get in shape, you can instead reframe that as I'm going to drive to the gym at 6 p.m. And what you're doing is basically making the first step of the process very obvious. This way you know exactly what you need to do to get started, and it's usually something small and easy. There's less thinking and less hesitation because the first action has very low friction. A way of reframing this in your mind is to tell yourself the next small action you can take right now. Something very easy instead of telling yourself you must complete the end goal. Another example is saying something like, I'm going to go and pick up a shirt off my floor if you're attempting to clean your room. This makes it much easier to get started, and that's like 90% of the battle. So this one is really solid, and I'm going to be setting clear and small goals in the A tier. This one is the all or nothing mindset. This one is certainly a big motivation killer. This is when you miss one day and feel like you failed completely. In reality, missing one day probably doesn't matter so much in the grand scheme of things, but thinking that it does is what actually will destroy your consistency. A better approach is just getting back on track the next day without any overthinking. Consistency over time is what truly matters. I'm going to be putting this all or nothing or black and white thinking into the F tier. This is probably one of the worst things that you can do if you want to kill your motivation immediately. Next up, we have tracking your progress. When you can see your progress, it makes it a lot more motivating overall, and it turns something that's abstract into something real and trackable. Whether it's workouts, habits, or time spent on something, it all adds up. Even something simple like a notes app or a spreadsheet works. For example, I like to track all of my weightlifting workouts in Excel, and it is very rewarding to be able to look at the progress that I've made over time. The key to this is simply making progress visible. This way you always have a reserve of motivation that you can call upon by looking at your past growth. So I'm also going to be putting this one in A tier, probably even ahead of the goal setting. All right, now let's look at comparison. So this quote says that comparison is the thief of joy, and it's commonly attributed to Teddy Roosevelt. Well, it may be considered a cliche, that doesn't make it any less true. And I think it's especially true in the age of the internet. Of course, when you're comparing yourself to others online, you're basically seeing a highlight reel of somebody else's life. And I think for most people, this usually just straight up kills their motivation. I think the only person that you should really be comparing comparing yourself to is the you from yesterday or the you from your past. You can vow to build off the habits that your past self has been building for you and improve at them a little more each day. You owe that much to your past, present, and future selves. But comparison, when it comes to comparing yourself to others, especially in an online context, definitely has to also be F tier, probably right between these two. Now we have listening to music. Music can help you get into a certain headspace. For example, some hype music can be used for workouts, while calmer music can be used for focused studying. A small tip here is having specific playlists for specific tasks. This way your brain will start to associate that certain music with that activity. I have a playlist of classical instrumental music, and it helps me to lock in when needed during late nights studying in college. So I think music is very useful, but probably not foundational, and you have to be careful that it isn't super distracting. So I'm going to be putting music in B tier for its power to motivate. All right, last up, we have high stimulation. This includes things like social media, pornography, or other high dopamine activities. Over time, these can lower your baseline motivation, and everything else in your life will just feel way less interesting. A practical way to improve on this one is simply to focus on reducing your stimulation gradually. You don't have to cut everything out at once, but small reductions can help reset your baseline over time. But overstimulation is probably the worst thing to do for your motivation. I think this is definitely one of the biggest plagues on motivation for Gen Z, and ties pretty closely in with doom scrolling. So I'm going to be putting it at the bottom of F tier, and I'm probably going to move doom scrolling right next to it since those two are pretty similar. Anyways, there you have it. That is the motivation tier list. At the end of the day, motivation isn't something that you can just wait around for. It's something that you need to build over time. And most of it comes down to a few key things. Those being consistency, sleep, environment, and tracking small wins, as well as exercise. The other tools can certainly help, but they really only help on top of those fundamentals. So if you focus on getting these right up here, you won't have to rely on motivation sporadically occurring as much. It'll start to show up on its own. The goal isn't to feel motivated 100% of the time, since that is unrealistic. Instead, it's to make taking action a little easier by reducing friction for good habits and increasing it for distracting ones. Using motivation to consistently show up eventually becomes discipline, which itself eventually will morph into identity, at which point motivation is largely self-sustaining. So I hope this video provided some useful insights for you guys, and let me know down in the comments below what tips for building motivation you guys have, or if I missed anything. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.